everyone. I'm Dr. Kavita, and welcome to the Unlearning Podcast. I'm a double-boarded child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I created this platform to help and educate others to become and feel mentally and emotionally healthier, and to talk about a variety of mental health topics, to figure out what we may need to unlearn and how we got there. It could be from unhealthy thinking patterns, even emotional patterns, our behaviors, and we could talk about what we could do about it. I wanted to introduce our guest, our very first guest, very special, Guy, who is the owner of this wonderful local store called Everything Natural in Clark Summit, PA. If you're ever around the area or the Scranton area, you can come check it out. And he's a pharmacist by training. And you want to say a little more about yourself too?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Kavita. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to talk today about holistic health and specifically, some interesting topics we're going to get into. I worked as a pharmacist for 12 years, and over time I really felt drawn to holistic health and natural medicine. So, it was a great transition to go into the health food store space, and now my wife and I run the health food store, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I love that. I will say my kids love going to your store, and you have like the little shopping carts for them, and they just love going around. They love the toys in the back, and I can find if I want something organic and natural, like your store's the go-to place. So I love it. It's a great place to have in the community, I feel.
Yeah. It's been that way for almost actually 40 years. We had our 40th anniversary this year too. So it's been, a staple in the community for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. So today's topic is going to be about transgenerational trauma. And that sounds like a mouthful, and we'll get into what it is. But it's a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, actually. I see it in my practice with the families I've worked with personally. And I feel like it's a phenomenon that affects so many people, but they may not even know that it affects them. So I just want to go into a definition of it first. What is transgenerational trauma? The way I look at it is it's kind of like side effects or the passing down of trauma. It could be from an acute traumatic event, like abuse. That could be chronic too, or complex. It could be from systemic oppression, racism. There's so many different things that could happen to a family or to a collective, and it's things that could get passed down, usually subconsciously or unconsciously. I feel like there's different ways that can show up in us. It could be anxiety that, we don't know where it's coming from, feeling guilty easily, getting triggered into shame cycles or feeling ashamed easily, depression, trauma symptoms, PTSD. I would love to go into the framework you mentioned, because I think that's a good base to start off with as far as the different layers.
Yeah, so Dr. Klinghardt in Seattle has basically taken an old idea and expanded on it, and he developed what's called the 5 levels of healing. So if you think about a pyramid, the base level is the physical body, the next level would be the electrical body, the next level would be the mental body, and then you go into the spiritual bodies. So what that means is if you work on a problem on the physical body, that could be things like working on your nutrition or getting a massage. Those types of remedies and health treatments will help symptoms on the physical body. Similarly, as you move up to the mental body, so that's an example where, let's say you go for psychotherapy or you work with a counselor, you're working on things in the mental field. That can work there, but it also can help, by improving our mind, we can also improve things below it. So that can improve our physical body and our symptoms. So the higher you go up in the pyramid, the more powerful the treatment could be. And that's where family systems and family therapy comes in. That's really on the 4th level. The 4th level is our spirituality and our connection to our soul and our family soul, which we'll talk about. And the last level is our connection to God or the universe or source. That's why you see things of people when they have profound spiritual experiences, sometimes they can recover from things like stage 4 cancer overnight. So, the reason why it's so important, I think, to talk about and to include in the conversation family systems and family trauma is because it's on such a high level that it's powerful. If you can heal things on the family level, a lot of times you can improve symptoms in the body as you deal with health issues.
Yeah, I think that I love that kind of that framework and looking at it that way, and then how there's a top-down effect. If you heal things from like on that familial level, and how that could impact everybody. Like like the children, and then when they grow up to become parents, and then their children, and then I love that.
Yeah, that's why it's so powerful, because you can have healing for yourself, but then you're also potentially going to have healing for your next generation too, which is really important, because without incorporating this topic into the health sphere, we may be passing down unconsciously all sorts of belief systems and behavioral patterns that we didn't even know were passed down from our parents.
Exactly. I think being able to notice that in yourself, I guess even with us bringing up this topic, I love that we're talking about it, because it's, I think, not talked about enough, and it definitely needs more awareness with, what have you inherited from your parents that may not be serving you. It could be hurting you even. It could be maladaptive. For example, let's say, there's so many examples for this, I feel. Like if you had like a narcissistic parent and they maybe had emotional outbursts or anger outbursts that taught you then like, oh, there's no space for my emotions. Because I've seen that, like self-abandonment, or, oh, I have to earn love. I have to earn my keep, earn my worth. I see that, unfortunately, with kids if they have that kind of parent. But then when I want to put out there, this is not to blame anyone out there. This is without judgment. It's just, I want to emphasize that I think there is this bigger picture. If you dig deep enough, like how far back does that actually go? Like, did it start with, let's say, those kind of parents? No. How were their parents with them? How did they parent them? And then if you go even further back, like what were the situations your parents or grandparents grew up in? I think about a lot of the big historical events like World War II or the Vietnam War or the Great Depression, or like we were talking about before, British colonialism in India. Like I saw this meme actually on Instagram that said like, it showed how the British colonizers were in India way back when, from like the 1800s into 1900s. And I thought, wow, my grandparents were born when Britain was still in India, occupying India. And then my parents were born soon after that. And I know how that affected my grandparents. Like I've heard stories from them about like the oppression and like the resistance. Like it's wild. They grew up in that time. And I know and how that affected my parents, like, hearing that or being raised by parents who grew up in that time. It's wild. So if you really dig deep enough, I feel you could find all these like deeper layers to, what affected their psyche, their well-being. I think also this is cross-cultural. There's like so much stigma with seeking mental health care. Like I know for my parents and grandparents, it's like, what was that? I think like how you mentioned the layers, like the physical was what was prioritized because like there was scarcity. And so that became, of course, top priority to make sure there was food, shelter, and like, if the physical things were taken care of, it's like, oh, okay, that's good enough. We're providing for you. And I think like mental and emotional well-being was kind of put to the side.
And one of those, you mentioned World War II, that reminded me, Mark Wolin, he has a book called It Didn't Start With You. And he did a lot of work as a therapist for years. And he kind of felt that there was something else out there to be able to help his patients. And through his own personal experience, he was drawn to family constellation therapy. And looking at, and even before getting into formal family constellation therapy, which we can talk about, he looked at, what did other people that dealt with family systems, what did they come up with to help resolve people's health problems, and especially things that were passed down the line. And when you mentioned World War II, that reminded me, he has a story of one of his patients where, and it's a pretty emotional story, but it really drives home the point of how trauma can be passed down. And so there was a woman who became suicidal when she was in her early 20s. And she became suicidal in a very specific way. And it's, it's a little dark, but it does highlight an important point. She became suicidal in a way where she wanted to burn. And it was very, very strange. It came on her all of a sudden. And when they looked into her family history, they found that her grandmother had survived the Holocaust and lost all of her siblings.
Oh my goodness.
And her grandmother had, when they actually looked into old diary notes, and they asked other members of the family what was going on, the grandmother clearly had what was called survivor's guilt, and that's she felt guilty that she survived while all her siblings died. So that trauma of that the grandmother experienced passed down the generations, and it actually happened at the same age that the grandmother was when she lost her siblings.
Oh my goodness.
That's the exact same age that the woman who developed the suicidality, it was all connected. So when he was able to take her and work with her in a family constellation type of setting, he was able to bring resolution to her feelings. And this is kind of where it comes in, where you mentioned before when you opened about how trauma can pass down, and unresolved emotional distress and can pass down the line.
Right.
It's just it was just one example I thought I'd share.
Yeah, I love that example. I actually, I think I remember that. I talked about it with my friend who read the book, and I think for that woman, she didn't have any notable history. Like it really just came out of nowhere. It's not like she knew anyone who did that, or had any it was really out of the blue.
Yeah.
It's so wild, and that was the only connection that they, but it's the significant one where it was from her grandmother who had that trauma from, oh my goodness, from being in the Holocaust and everything. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think there's, every family wants to, the family system, the family soul, because just how we have a soul, our family has a soul, and the family soul wants to resolve conflicts is really what it aims for. It wishes for healing, but if things don't heal, it kind of gets kicked down the line for the next generation, or maybe skip a generation for them to try to heal from it. So that's kind of where we talked about before. Before we went live, we talked a little bit about breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to look at our own life and our own traumas and our own situations and see, am I repeating anything that was repeated by my ancestors? And that's kind of like where family constellation therapy and other modalities come into place to help bring resolution to some of these things, because until you are aware of it, you can't really deal with it.
Exactly. I love that you're bringing up all those points, because I really think there's so much that didn't start with us if we actually, dig deep and look within ourselves. And there was something else you said that was really good too. If we're not aware of it, we could be unintentionally passing things down to our own children and continuing the cycle. I want to give a shout out to those who are what we call cycle breakers, because if you already have some familiarity with this topic and know about your family history and want to not pass that down to your children, major shout out, because first of all, this is a very heavy topic. It's a huge, it's it's bigger than us, beyond us. It, can go back many generations potentially. And so, I want to emphasize, it's hard work. It takes effort. It's not easy, especially as a parent, when you are, we're both parents. And I feel like, when you're doing, it's extra work, it's a lot mentally and emotionally. If this ever feels too heavy, I want to make sure you're noticing your breath. For those of you who are listening, take pauses if you need. If you've started, if this is ringing any bells for you, or opening your eyes to anything that you're doing or that you've noticed in your family, maybe some dysfunctional patterns or unhealthy patterns, it's good to journal about too. Just want to put that out there. Yeah, this is heavy work.
Yeah, and I think, maybe we could talk a little bit about how does this even happen? Like how does this pass on? Like actually physically, because
Yeah.
they talk about it in Mark's book. He talks a little bit about it, where especially if you take an example of a woman, when a woman's pregnant, let's say she has a female baby in her womb. At a certain point, that baby, because the babies are born with all the eggs that they're going to have. So,
That's right.
So at one point before the baby's born, there in a way will be 3 generations in one body.
That's right.
So everything that the mother feels, she thinks, she experiences will be felt by the baby and the eggs inside the baby. So that's just kind of one way, because some of this could seem a little bit woo-woo, but when you really just take a second and think about, wow, like if you have 3 generations in one body and you're all sharing the same energy, the same feelings, the same, everything is being heard, everything, in the womb is able to be heard outside the womb. And I'm sorry, everything, the baby in the womb can hear what's going on, can feel what's going on. That just kind of gives a little bit of framework to think, well, maybe it is possible that some of this stuff can happen. And it's easy to get caught up on that. Bad stuff can get passed down, but there's also good stuff can get passed down too.
Yes.
We draw a lot of, I also want to highlight that too, because it's not just about, having bad experiences from our ancestors affect us today in a negative way. It's also the good things that happened and the heroic things that our ancestors may have did can provide us strength. There's a nice practice that Bert Hellinger had talked about where, in times of weakness or in times of, where you're having struggle in your life, you can actually close your eyes and picture if you're a man, picture your father behind you, or if you're a woman, picture your mother standing behind you, and then take it generation after generation after generation. So if you're a man, think about your father standing behind you, providing you strength, and think about his father standing behind him, and continue it. And think about all the generations of if you're a man, you could think about the fathers before you. If you're a woman, you could think about all the mothers. Think about all the mothers that had, all the struggles and experiences and the goods, the bads, and all the heroic things they may have had to done themselves to get to this point. There's a lot of power in our ancestry, and I think it's easy to, we live in a world where it's easy to just forget about it. It's easy to just forget about all that took for us to come here today. And I think it's a nice thing to bring into the fold.
I love that you're bringing up that too, because it's funny, my first episode was about the negativity bias. So that's such a good thing to highlight, that we don't want to just focus on the negative or the trauma that we may have inherited or things like that have been passed down. There's also all these strengths and positives and love. I love how you mentioned, you could think of all of your ancestors before, and that's so empowering. I love it.
Yeah, really, it's many, many generations of strength that actually flows through us today. It took a lot for us to be here today, and, to be here and alive and well.
That's so true.
I think it's a good practice every now and then to just reflect on that and to be grateful for it too, to be thankful, to be thankful for our ancestors for, all that they did to bring us here today.
Yeah, I think about the modern conveniences we have today and how, oh my goodness, just like a few generations ago, how different it was. And there were definitely all of these other struggles that we don't have to worry about today that they had. Those were their challenges they had to face. And I love that, because it's like they are literally living in us, technically genetically, and then if you look at the other layers, beyond, spiritually, and so powerful.
Yeah, and I think they're there rooting for us too, regardless of whether you have a strong religious background or a spiritual background. I think wherever our ancestors might be, I think they're definitely rooting for us, and they're rooting for our success now. And I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I feel like I've the personal spiritual experiences I was telling you about before the show. That's kind of what came up for me. Feeling like my grandparents and great grandparents, encouraging me and wanting the best for me. And I think at the end of the day, that's what all parents and grandparents want for their kids and grandkids. They want the best. I really think too, there's all sorts of different parents and caregivers out there. They're doing the best they can with what they know and what they have, and they're going off of how they were raised. So there's that too. But yeah, I think they do, mean well.
I think that brings, next point that, it's very important to accept our parents for who they are, because we don't know all the details of how they were raised and all the little struggles that they had when they were growing up with their parents and their parents before them. So we always have to assume that our parents did the best job that they did, because if we carry resentment towards one of our parents throughout our adulthood, that can then disrupt our own way of parenting our children. So what Hellinger talks about is, and for a moment, actually, I haven't even talked about who Bert was.
Who
so
is
Bert,
that? Yeah.
So Bert,
Bert.
we talked a little bit about, Mark Wolin, he wrote the book, It Didn't Start With You, and he works on family systems and family therapy, specifically family constellation therapy. Well, he got a lot of it from training with Bert Hellinger, who's considered one of the, original big people in family constellation therapy, and he developed a lot of these what he calls orders in family systems. So he was a therapist who actually started out working with the Zulus and tribe in southern Africa. He learned a lot just by observing them, and there's been a lot of lost knowledge over the years from all the different tribes people that have survived on their own for many generations. So he took what he saw from them and how they operated and what worked and what didn't work, and when families were happy and cohesive and when families were dysfunctional, and he started paying attention to what characteristics were going on and what behavioral patterns were going on, and that kind of developed his start for developing family constellation therapy, where he was able to, he passed away a few years ago, but he was able to set up what's called family constellation, where you can then hopefully, bring to conscious awareness what's going on in the family system. And, he developed a lot of rules and orders and belief systems that kind of can guide people when they're figuring out, how do I go about all this stuff?
Yeah, I would love to go into that. I know you were saying with how our parents can be, we may unintentionally inherit those traits and then become them, even though that's the very thing we don't want to be.
Yeah. Hellinger talks about how when you reject one of your parents, you tend to take on some of those traits that you don't like, actually. It's kind of an unconscious thing that you're not even going to be aware of. So even though there may be something that our parents do or that they've done that hurt us a lot, the best thing we can do, and really the only thing we can do, is to accept them for who they are. Because that doesn't mean we should take abusive behavior, or we should accept. It's not about accepting or being okay with abuse, but it's more so accepting our parents, just accepting them for who they are. When we reject, especially parents, but anyone in the family system, that creates dysfunction. And he talks about, so there's certain things called entanglements and identification. So in that example with the woman who developed suicidal thoughts, she was being what's called identified with her prior generation. And what can happen sometimes is when secrets cover up things that happened in a prior generation, those secrets want to come to light. And sometimes they will unfold in a future generation. And one example is where the family system wants everybody to be included. So that's one important thing, is that a cohesive family will have everyone included. Again, it doesn't mean that you keep someone who's really abusive or dangerous to somebody. That's not about keeping them in the loop. But it's about always acknowledging and being aware. When we ostracize or we push someone away from our family, if it's severe enough, the family system doesn't like that, and it doesn't like having people excluded from the future growth of the family. So what can happen then is a future generation can then develop characteristics of that person. So that's why it's always good. It's just a good practice to be accepting and grateful for our parents, and like I said, to not reject them as much as we could. Because at the end of the day, they did give us life, and they most likely were trying their best with what they did.
Yeah, I know. I think the bottom line is that of it all is that there is that coming to that place of acceptance is like the ideal. I know also for a lot of the families and kids I've seen, they're on their journey with that and maybe very far from that. And I can see why too. I love that you brought up, what we're talking about is not condoning abuse or neglect, or so obviously those kind of, levels that of abuse is not okay. Yeah, physical, sexual abuse, even psychological abuse. If a parent or a family member is continuing to be that way, there is importance in having boundaries with someone who's continuing to be that way, where they're harmful to you physically or mentally and emotionally. Because I've seen that, and it usually is for the better in some scenarios, better for the rest of the family, and I know there are those who try really hard to get that person help. But if they're unfortunately in a place of denial, or, it may be really what I think it comes down to, it may be too painful or too difficult to face what they need to emotionally. I think that's where the retraction or denial comes in. But I think there's importance in having boundaries. I know some people go no contact with, those who are abusers like that. I just want to put that out there too, because there is importance in that. I think there's also importance in venting, so these are some of, I think, the strategies or important things to do in the healing process, which is, there's going to be understandable anger, grief, sadness. I think if we have unmet needs from childhood, things we wish we got from our parents, but we didn't, or if they were harsh, let's say, in the way they were parenting or disciplining or whatever it is, there is going to be, I think, this needed space. Like these emotions deserve to have space. I think that's important in processing it all and being able to eventually let it go and accept.
Yeah, I think maintaining boundaries is an important point, because sometimes it's not feasible to have an ongoing relationship with a certain family member, or maybe for a certain time. Maybe sometimes we need space for a period of time and we can reconnect later, and that's okay. I think what the family constellation mindset would be to still, in your heart, even if you do have a boundary where you're separate from a family member or a parent, to still try to keep a place in your heart where you do have an acceptance or a gratitude for life. I think that's kind of what they would say, is that you can create physical separation, but even if you're halfway across the world, your mom will still be your mom, and your father will still they'll always be, forever they'll be your father and your mother. So to try to hold a space for them is really what it is. But you're right, it's sometimes very important to keep boundaries and to take physical space.
But I feel like this is like life, what we could have inherited, whether it's like thinking patterns or modeled behaviors from our parents. I think about how far back that goes, and how many generations that it potentially goes back, and like learned behaviors can really be, passed down. And just because it was passed down to you doesn't mean, we don't like there's the good and there's the bad. We can be our mother's daughters or our son's father. We could be, known as the children of our parents. But I think we could take the good and, if we become aware of it, let go of the not good.
Yeah, I think that would be the goal for sure, is to take the strengths and the good things that happen and build upon those, and try to just be aware of the things that may be unconscious that we're still doing today, and to work on them. I mean, I see it in my life as a personal mission to kind of work on every day. I try to, and with having children is kind of like a great lens to see what I'm actually seeing in real time. How am I talking to them? How am I speaking to them? How am I reacting? Was that always the best way to react in a situation? Or, and whether or not it was from a family member that I inherited it from or not, maybe it's coming from myself, but, it's about always bringing conscious awareness to how we engage with other people, specifically our family, especially our family, and to always try to engage with a loving heart as much as we could, because all that will go on to the next generation. And, it's interesting how it ties in with the idea of karma. Karma, it has to do with, what goes around comes around, and how you behave, now may affect future generation, or if you believe in reincarnation, your future self, that's what's talked about when you come back again. Or even if you don't believe in that, it may affect you in your current life. What you do today may affect you a week from now. But it also works with the family system. So the good that we can do today will carry on too. So I try to focus on that and do the best that I can do now.
Yeah, I love that. I think about that when I'm parenting too. And I've noticed, even with like my training and everything I know, I still notice my blueprint is from like the way I was raised. And I've noticed like, I feel like it wouldn't like be brought into my awareness if I weren't a mom. Like, oh my goodness, this is what I'm saying, or what I just said was something literally my dad said or my mom said, and it freaks me out sometimes. And it's like, you know, because well, our early years, especially our first 5 years of life or first 7 years of life, are so formative. Obviously, our brain is continuing to grow and develop, and our personalities are into our adolescence. But we're really such sponges. Like, we pick up so much from our environment, and you know, whoever's raising us, whether it's our parents, grandparents, caregivers, whoever, like they do shape us so much. It shapes the way we think, our coping mechanisms, the way we love, the way we then parent. Like, you know, that's the whole passing down effect right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what parts are we aware of and what parts are we not aware of? That's kind of like where this work comes in, and being able to highlight, you know, what's unconsciously passing down.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned like having some place in your heart for your parents or whoever raised you, you know, regardless of if you feel like, well, not regardless, but, you know, how you feel about them, like that, you know, your feelings do matter and they're there for a reason. And, you know, can we learn to hold space for compassion? Like you said, you know, I think for a lot of us, we may not know if our parents haven't been open with us about how they were raised. And then if you go further back, like, you know, at the end of the day, we don't know exactly how their childhood may have been for them and how that shaped them. It could be in their, unconscious part of their mind, and they may not even know to explain it. I've seen that, and I do want to highlight, like, in the spirit of highlighting the good, there are some families who I see who are so psychologically minded. Like, you know, the parents have done the work. They know that they don't want to repeat the cycle and repeat, you know, like their childhood with their kids, and they want to do better. Like, they've become aware of it, whether through, you know, going to therapy themselves and doing that work on themselves and having these realizations. Or you know, I see some that just they come to it on their own. They know they just don't want to repeat it. And it's fascinating. There is really such resilience out there too. I want to highlight that. Yeah, there's such strength in the human spirit too, and growing from trauma, there can be that too.
Yeah, and I think the goal is not to become a perfect parent. Like when I first became a parent, I thought, oh yeah, everything's going to go perfect. But you know, we are going to make our mistakes, and you know, that's part of growing up and being a parent. But so putting that aside, I think it's still, it's like you said, it's kind of like this journey where you're looking at, you know, how can I bring the best for my family and my future generation? What can I do for that? You know, and maybe we could talk about some more of Bert's orders and laws. I don't know if you're interested in hearing. Another one has to do with the priority of relationships in the family system. So, you know, it has to do with not that any relationship is more important, because we try to stay away from words of more important, but it does have a priority. Like, for example, the mother and the father have a higher priority in some ways than the parent with the child, because if the mother and the father aren't getting along, that can affect the children. So that's why, you know, it's called an order of priority, where we prioritize the bond between the parents. If you could do it the best, and it's not feasible for everybody. I mean, there's times where, you know, people have to take space and have separation or divorce or whatever. But assuming that you can still, you know, co-parent together or be involved, there's something there with the bond that's important, that helps create stability and security for the children. You know, if they see a destructive relationship from their parents and they see that growing up, they're more likely to pass that on. And then he talks about the priority. It's about, like, it's not a formal hierarchy, but the firstborn child has a different characteristic and upbringing than the second child and the third child and the fourth child. And some of that has to do with, you know, just the simple observation of, well, when the firstborn was born, they were the only child, so they had all the attention and all the love, and there wasn't any division. So with each future child, there's some gap there where, maybe they didn't get as much support as the first child. But there's also something there with, just having, he calls it honoring. So what Bert talks about is like honoring the oldest child in the system, and having a certain respect for them and so on, and having a certain respect for your parents. And it's kind of like we talked about before, like a top down, and it even goes beyond that, having respect for, that's been taught about for, a long time, is to respect your elders and to incorporate your grandparents. While our family members are still around and is still with us, I think it could be a nice practice just to get connected with them, just to spend time with them, to learn about their history, their upbringing. What kind of conflicts did they experience? What kind of challenges did they have throughout their life, throughout their marriage, throughout their job, whatever it is, because that could shed a lot of light on what's going on with us. And even if it doesn't, there's still wisdom to be had in conversing with our ancestors.
Absolutely. I know we can learn so much from them. And I think that, those kind of conversations could be so insightful into how our parents grew up. Like, oh, wow, a grandma or grandpa, you lost your job. And then, there was that financial instability for some time, let's say. And then, oh, no wonder we have like this kind of scarcity mindset that lives in our home now, and worry about money, and so many different things like that can be inherited or passed down. And it could, if we have those kind of conversations, it could start there and start to shed some light on those like entities that could live still in the family that are who knows how old.
Yeah. That's one thing too, that kind of a side note I think is failing in society, is our connection between our youth and our elderly. I think there's a big gap right now where people aren't connecting at all, and there's like the elderly are staying with the elderly and the youth are playing with the youth. But I think it's important, whether you have grandparents or not, or that are still alive, I think it's important to connect the generations, because the elderly love seeing young children. It lights them up, and they're so happy to see a baby. And vice versa, a growing child can learn a lot from a wise older person. I think it's just kind of in the old times in tribal society, everybody was kind of living together and sharing information and sharing love and sharing resources. And right now we're kind of experiencing a little more division with that.
Yeah, I feel like I think about that all the time, especially after becoming a mom. And I feel grateful to have resources and like grandparents involved. I know not everyone has that. And it hurts my heart though, because I see, I've seen the single mom struggling, or, all these different kinds of family dynamics. And we're more siloed, especially in American culture, I feel, where we were meant to raise children in a village or live in that kind of setting where we have community and togetherness and, like you said, sharing of resources, but also of wisdom, love. I feel like the point you mentioned with elders and like the youth being more connected with each other, I feel like there's so much we could learn from our elders, even just from our parents, but our grandparents too, and what they experienced. And there could even be eye-opening conversations in that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Oh, I want to highlight, I remember now, when you mentioned like having a place in your heart for accepting like where you came from, who raised you, forgiveness actually is so good for the nervous system. It actually can help with resetting and resettling it, because holding, like, there is the importance of venting, like I mentioned. Like if you have understandable anger, sadness, or whatnot with what you wish you had or didn't have, there is at the end of it that importance of being able to let go, and that could be a whole process, but it really helps the nervous system so much and bring down anxiety so much. I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few books out that talk about what's called anchored emotions or trapped emotions. So when we experience difficult situations, distressful situations, acute trauma, or just long-term difficult life situations, we can, what's called store emotions in the body. And a good example is, if people don't have trouble believing that's a real thing, I would say talk to somebody that does deep tissue therapy, because I know a lot of stories of where a therapist was working, especially deep tissue, and all of a sudden the patient on the table, massage table, got very emotional, started crying, or a big emotion came up. It's because certain emotions can be actually physically trapped in the body. So that's
That's
kind of,
true.
comes into how do you process an emotion. This is a difficult topic. Not everyone can, say that and actually no one can say that they process every emotion in a healthy way all the time.
Right. That's not
We're
realistic.
getting bombarded with all sorts of life stuff, and but when we don't, you say, fully process it, fully feel it to the full extent, if we bury it, suppress it, repress it,
Exactly.
it can then linger in the body, and then that emotion that lingers in the body can then create dysfunction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you brought up that point too, because I think, you know, emotions can get trapped. I see it all the time, where we call it's like somatization,
Mm.
where unresolved conflict, unresolved trauma, then it's trapped and it's energy. Where else does it have to go? It ends up manifesting or can manifest physically. It could be these non-specific symptoms of headaches, chronic pain, or this and that, assuming there's not anything else to account for it, but it
Mm.
can manifest that way. That's interesting hearing about those who've had deep tissue massage and then they suddenly have an emotional
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think as a practitioner or someone who works in the health sphere, it's just important to kind of incorporate all these ideas into one. We're very,
Mm,
in modern medicine, we're very focused on the physical body, kind of what I was talking about before with the
mm,
pyramid and the 5 levels of healing. We're
yeah.
very wrapped up in that physical body, that base level and don't get me wrong, having strong nutrition and, taking care of your body
That's
is
all
very,
important.
very important. It's the base and it's the foundation for health. But there's a lot more to health, and that's why I think of holistic as a
Mm-hmm.
whole. It's a whole picture, and
Mm-hmm.
it's your mind, body, and spirit all being in balance in one, and
Mm-hmm.
really accounting for that. So that includes the anchored emotions and the trapped emotions, and are
Mm,
we happy with what we're dealing with in our life situation? Are we actively working to resolve our conflicts, or are we
mm,
just burying them and just sticking our head in the sand? Are we
mm-hmm.
dealing with it? And
Mm-hmm.
then like we talked about earlier, like the next level is the family systems. Is there actually stuff going on that's beyond our specific life situation? Is it bigger than that?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a good practitioner, I think, will incorporate that entire picture. And actually, it's called a genogram where you actually map out your history and your ancestry.
Mm.
It's a good practice to do because a lot of times you find things you didn't know about. So if
Hmm.
you interview an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or if you have a great grandparent,
Mm.
the farther you can go back, the better, because a lot of times you're going to find stories and information that you didn't know about.
Hmm.
So like another example is even examples, and Hellinger talks about the example of having a miscarriage. So
Mm.
depending on the situation and the circumstances, it's important to acknowledge that there was a life created and it
Mm.
didn't come to fruition. It didn't come
Mm.
to full birth.
Mm.
It's important to acknowledge and again hold a place in your heart for that person, because
Mm.
when life is created, it becomes part of the family system no matter
Mm.
what. And it doesn't mean that just because something happens, something bad is going to happen in the next generation. That's not what
Yeah.
I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
It's more about we don't want to forget and bury things,
Mm.
and that's
Mm.
kind of where a genogram comes in, where you can look at what did happen in my ancestry, whether it's
Mm.
there was a secret affair going on that produced a child and it was kept a secret, we don't know
Yeah.
about it, but somebody actually has a half brother or a half
Mm.
sister. The
Mm.
family system wants there to be inclusion and acceptance for everyone in the family,
Mm.
again, not to force bad relationships on anyone or push
Right.
anyone into a
Mm-hmm.
dangerous situation.
Right.
That's not
Right.
the situation at all. But in an ideal world, the family soul or the family system really wants everyone to be acknowledged and included.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's Bert Hellinger's
Yeah,
framework
yeah.
of
Mm-hmm.
like ideally that's what is desired, inclusivity
Mm-hmm.
and belonging and like
Belonging, yeah, that's the word.
yeah,
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 yeah.
like in that like family unit or like that's like it's foundational. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a home base.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think everyone needs to have that kind of home base to go to. I mean, we can have that within us in our internal world, and I think there's importance in that. But I think we all, as human beings, naturally crave belonging.
Mm-hmm.
So there's such important, especially with family. And family could be whether it's like genetic, like, your biological
Mm-hmm.
relatives, or I think family can be created too. But I
Mm-hmm.
think we
Yeah.
all like have that base need of like someone to go home to or like a yeah like a place to land, a safe space from the rest of the world.
It's a powerful force, and it drives people to stay loyal to their family too. Sometimes in an unhealthy way. Sometimes there's an unconscious loyalty to our parents and our family, to the culture and the way our family has carried on itself for a long time. So that sometimes we feel this unconscious pull to behave exactly how our parents did, or to raise our children with a certain tradition that maybe we don't feel is totally right, but our parents did it. So there's a strong pull for the family to stay together. And, I think belonging is a really good word and a home base that we feel this pull towards. And most of the time it's healthy and normal and good. But sometimes, like we've been talking about, there's also sometimes negative behaviors or negative belief systems that we've inherited that we have to break free from. And that's kind of where the breaking the cycle takes place.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I love that you're highlighting that too. Oh, I think when you mentioned like love, if it goes from bottom up, like let's say, another point is, let's say if parents who maybe didn't get the love that they needed, then kind of are looking to their kids to fill those voids, then there's that can happen.
Yeah, that's another big point. It's called one of the orders of love that Bert talks about, is that love flows down. So love flows from the parents to the children, and it should always, it can change in the situation of extreme elderly parents where the children are taking care of their elderly parents. But aside from that, in general, love should flow down, whereas more love is going down toward the children than from the children coming up. And that's okay, because that means the children then, if they have children, someday, they'll pass it down, and it keeps going down like that. But like you mentioned, if the roles are getting reversed and the parents are looking for love and affection from their children too much, that kind of ties in back into what we were talking about with the priority of the bond between the mother and the father, or the parents. If it's a different mother or father, it's about the parents. They should be trying to derive or have their love from their partner. Their primary love should be from their partner, not from the children, because that can create entanglements in situations where the children feel obliged to do things that maybe they otherwise shouldn't do or shouldn't be involved with, or maybe even shouldn't know. I mean, there's certain things that's likely should be kept secret from the children. A lot of times parents will confide in their adult children about certain secrets and dark things that maybe happened, and they're kind of almost using their child as a counselor. And I think there's a role for counselors, there's a role for children, and I don't know if they should be mixed. Even if your child becomes a counselor someday, I think there should be some separation there. And again, it kind of comes to this base rule, like we talked about. The first relationship has a priority. That's one of his orders. The first, the first relationship has a higher priority than the subsequent relationship.
I've definitely seen a lot of that with what we call like parentified kids, kids that have to mature early on and become caretakers physically, but especially emotionally. I've seen that, and the blurriness of the roles, that could definitely be a problem, where kids are meant to be just kids and not take on those bigger responsibilities. And there's the like chronic and complex trauma from that if they grew up that way. I've definitely seen that. But yeah, I want to highlight, I think the first thing is to be aware and ask those questions. What kind of sayings from my family live in my head, or how are just even thinking about how the dynamics are in your home or how you grew up. Like, just to even start thinking about that, I think is huge. We can help with starting that healing process and go into the what about the family constellation therapy. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So it's kind of one of those woo-woo topics that it could be a little hard to digest at first, but Hellinger built upon what's called family constellation therapy, and he has several books with many, many examples from clinics and therapies that he's done. So a family constellation is where you set up with a group of people that are representatives for your family. So let's say that there was a conflict in your family, or say there's somebody with a serious health issue in your family that you wanted to see if there's an underlying family inherited trauma that's maybe causing it. You can do, with a skilled practitioner, a trained practitioner, you can do what's called family constellation, where you'll have in a group setting, you'll have representatives play the members of your family, the key members that are involved in this. So it could be the parents, it could be the children, it could be the grandparents, it could be anyone close in the first or second degree from you. And you set them up, and it's really astonishing when you read about these constellations that get set up. The representatives that go in place for the people in your family, they actually oftentimes develop behaviors and thoughts of the actual person in your family.
Wow.
Yeah. And it has to do with the intention behind what's going on and the intention of the practitioner. But there's many. I was actually part of one family constellation therapy.
Wow.
Where I saw there was a woman who all of a sudden she was taking the place of the main patient's mother, and all of a sudden she was saying that she felt like a tidal wave was coming over her, like just randomly out of the blue. And when after the session was over, they asked, like, what was that about? And the patient had said, well, my mother had almost drowned from falling off a boat in the middle of the ocean when she was 3 years old. Like, so these things really do happen. The person that was playing the role of the mother didn't even know about that didn't even know about that story
beforehand. Wow.
So what happens during the constellation is you have representatives take the place of the people in your family, and you look at how they then interact and what they're feeling. And the practitioner will then place people in different orientations to see, like, okay, maybe I'll move you next to this person. How does that feel? Turn you away from this person. How does that feel? And you gain a lot of insight from moving people around and just asking, like, how do you feel right now? And it's a very esoteric kind of woo-woo topic, but it's just one way that you can try to bring healing or resolution to family conflicts and family trauma. Because what happens at the end is then you go in place. So you have everybody playing, you have someone playing you as well. So you have somebody playing.
So you're outside of it.
So you're watching it. So you're watching them all interact, and you're kind of seeing from a third party perspective your family for the first time.
That's interesting.
But then at the very end, the practitioner oftentimes will place you in place of yourself. And then you have to really kind of be in tune and see, like, what do I feel? Does this feel good? Does this not feel good? And what a lot of times you find is that, like, I think in the example that I was part of, which I was helping with the one time, was there was an unhealthy connection between the mother and the daughter, and which would be what's called an entanglement, where they were entangled in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
They're kind of like what we were talking about before, where the daughter was being too caretaking for the mother in an emotional way, like her emotional sounding board a little too much. So there was a process where they helped break that, and that was believed to be therapeutic. The way that constellation therapy works then is, after it's all said and done, you review it, you talk about it with the practitioner, you talk to the group about what they felt and what they experienced, and then you kind of let it sit. The idea is that you kind of let it integrate over the months or years. And a lot of people find that it may not necessarily correct their physical problems, say they had eczema or say they had migraines for their whole life, but sometimes it does actually help a physical problem. But more importantly, a lot of times it just brings greater peace to the system and to the person that was dealing with the conflict.
Wow, that is so fascinating, because before you, I've never heard of family constellation therapy. There's other modalities like, in the mental health field that we tend to recommend. But when you explained it before, I found it to be so interesting. And it's a great way to really analyze the dynamics from that outside perspective. Like, I feel like you could be able to then really have a good look at it that way when you have that, when you're looking at others played those different roles from the outside, and then notice what you're feeling, so you're growing that attunement with yourself and noticing what's coming up for you emotionally and thoughts or beliefs. So I love that. So a great way to raise awareness. And I wonder if talking through certain conflicts with someone who may not be your actual mom or dad or that family member, it's less triggering and it's in a safe space, controlled space. So that's so cool.
Yeah. It's one of those things not a lot of people know about, and it's still kind of a hidden therapy.
Because I will say, going into the other modalities that I've that we tend to recommend in the mental health field, like, are different. Like, I mean, there's family therapy, like traditional family therapy, which I still think is obviously good to have like a third party professional. Like a lot of the time we do need someone like that to like navigate family conflict or work through like bigger, like, you know, like if there's like a transgenerational trauma or like bigger traumas like that the family has experienced, and if it goes back generations, I think you need to have someone like that there to help guide and work through all of that. There's other modalities like if you've heard of TFCBT, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, we recommend that all the time. It's evidence based, it's pretty structured. This is where I see a lot of patients shut down actually and retreat, you know, because it may not feel safe if they're not ready, if it's too scary, they may stop going. I know there are those kids and parents who don't even want to dive into it at all because it doesn't feel safe. I feel like it really does boil down to safety, in this case, emotional and psychological safety. If it was a trauma though, that was once like a physical trauma or physical abuse, like it was at the time. But what's interesting is that the nervous system actually has no sense of time. So things that you have experienced in the past kind of can get lived, they still live there, or it's like those trapped emotions or trapped experiences that then are unprocessed and not healed and are stuck in us. So sometimes I see that, unfortunately, which I give so much compassion to those because it is very scary. It could feel like you're reliving that past trauma and like as if you're back there all over again. And that's where the avoidance could come in. I think that's why in this modality with trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, they highlight the first part being like building that foundation of and that sense of safety and having like the tools in your toolbox to be able to deal with those distressing feelings that will come up with processing actually what happened. And like you said, it could even go further back. So there's that. There's EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, another trauma therapy modality that has been very well studied. I know personally it changed my life. Like I actually didn't even realize I had blocked traumatic childhood experiences that only came up for the first time ever when we were diving deep in like some of the EMDR sessions I did with my therapist. It was wild. Like you said, you know, things that could have happened either in your childhood or for your parents or grandparents, like, you know, could be passed down and repressed or buried deep, and you may not even know it. It's wild how the mind could be. And there's EMDR, there's IFS, internal family systems, or parts work, if you've heard of that. It's kind of like how you described family constellation therapy in a bit, where you could have like your mom and your dad or other family members, like literally be like, you could have chairs for them, like, you know, for each one of them and kind of work through stuff with them that way. So there's that. And there's so many other modalities, but like the TFCBT and EMDR are like the evidence-based ones I wanted to mention, or even just working with a therapist, like to start. I feel like can be so helpful in starting your journey with healing this kind of trauma, because it's bigger than you. I think it's a great segue to bring up like the ownership piece, or how, like, you know, you may not like what has been passed down, and you could, you know, beat yourself up for it, or wonder, why do I have to deal with this? And why, you know, like, oh, why me? And I have compassion for those who, you know, feel that way, because, you know, you probably, like, if you got dealt a hand of cards that, you know, you didn't want to be dealt, like, it's like, oh, like, you know, you're like, I didn't ask for this. Like, I've seen those different kinds of mentalities all the time. And if you were abused, you were a victim. And at the same time, there's this other side of it of, you know, you know, this is what we have to, like, at the end of the day, to deal with. If we had our power taken away, it doesn't mean we can't get our power back. I know you phrased it in such a good way before.
Yeah, I mean, there's also something to fate and destiny, that where, you know, we're maybe perhaps set up to experience certain things in this life. And some of those things may be from our own doing. And some of those things may be coming from our ancestors or an inherited trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of where they come from, we never want to slide into what's called victim consciousness. We never want to slide into, framing ourselves in our life as a victim, because, the point of this work is really to take your power back, to shine light, the light of consciousness on what's really going on, and then take accountability for moving forward. There could have been something that happened in your past, or maybe something, that's troubling you now is just about you and your life, and it has nothing to do with your ancestors. But either way, it's important to always take accountability and to take action, and to not kick the can down the road, so to speak, because that can will keep going, and our children will pick up that can. So I think that's why it's just an important decision to make, in life, in adulthood, that I'm going to try to handle and resolve to the best of my ability the situations that are difficult, troublesome, or they're really bothering me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's such importance in that and healing in that, and not blaming yourself or anybody else. It could be, understandably easy to do that, and there's the anger in that. And though I feel like that could only go for so long too, where then you're the one suffering with that if we continue to hold on to that, so yeah, I think that's so important and it's empowering to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to thank you again for coming and being here on the show and talking with me about this very important topic. And it was so much fun, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Kavita.
Yeah.